Hello again, Reg audience. Delighted to be back with you today. We're talking about latency. It is the new downtime. Much more interesting than the old downtime, but just as irritating, just as bad for your business. So we'll be talking about caching today, and particularly the Redis cache and what you should be doing about it to make sure that you maintain the sorts of customer service and the sorts of business operations that you want and everyone who works with you wants as well. Who's going to be helping me with this? It's my evil twin, Bill. Hello, Bill.
Hi, Tim. How are you today?
I'm all right. Thank you very much. I love your background. We've had a lot of good backgrounds. I think yours is well up with it. Tell me what we've got in the background there.
Well, there's some Kansas City Chiefs paraphernalia on the wall. They just won a small game in the U.S. not too long ago. So they're very proud of that achievement, as I am as well. You'll also see a Star Wars pinball machine there, and we may catch a glimpse of a labradoodle named Saber that will be running around here. Hopefully, he will stay silent while we're on the phone.
I think you have scored the maximum points possible for Regcast backgrounds in this. I don't think that there is. I don't think there's anything very much better than a Star Wars pinball machine for this. But fantastic to have you on. Bill, tell me a little bit about Redis. We're going to be learning a lot more about Redis. Tell me a little bit about Redis for people who don't know where it came from and what you do there.
So Redis itself has been around for a little over 12 years as a caching company. And myself, I've been with Redis a little over 2 years now. Most of my career has been spent in relational databases over the last decade or so, NoSQL databases. So pretty much anything data related, that has been my wheelhouse for my entire career.
Excellent. And so Redis is it's an open source project, isn't it?
That is correct. Everyone can go out and download it for free and take a look at it and play with it. And Redis, the company who I work for, is responsible for maintaining those repositories and also produces the best version of Redis possible, which is Redis Enterprise.
We're going to be talking about that quite a lot today.
Absolutely.
This is what we're going to be talking about in the next half hour or so. As we are talking about caching, what happens if your cache is unreliable? What is the penalty for that now? It's not something, well, put it this way, it's not something we've ever discussed on a Ragcast before, and we're guessing that it's not something that many of you worry about day to day, but maybe you should be. So then we'll be looking at how you scale your cache and also what Redis Enterprise has for you compared to the free version, compared to not caching at all as well, I guess. First of all, we've got to define our terms, haven't we, Bill? We've got to work out what a cache is, what we mean when we're talking cache, and find out a little bit more about what Redis does in caching.
So in terms of caching, pretty much everything you do today deals with a cache in some way, shape, or form. If you think about how data is stored, traditionally data has been stored on disk, which in most cases is the slowest part of the infrastructure, any given compute node or compute resource. Those spinning disks, in some cases, they're even NVMe faster disks, but even still, they're not as fast as memory. And that's really where Redis shines, is that Redis is a place in memory where the data is stored. And then Redis Enterprise is just bringing those enterprise capabilities like durability, availability, replication, all of those things to the enterprise level to allow you to manage that cache in a more effective way. And as we started out the conversation by saying latency is the new downtime, think about the last time that you went on a website and tried to maybe purchase something or maybe interacted with your financial institution. If something seemed to be slow, most people's first response is, what's wrong, right? We expect single second access, sub-second access. We expect all of this data to come back, lickety split very, very fast. And Redis is an enabling technology to allow that to happen.
Yeah, back in the day, if you had the sort of wait for, well, it could be almost forever, isn't it? You sat there saying, well, this is just how the internet works, isn't it? You cannot really define performance standards. Well, we're well past that now, aren't we? For anyone that's in any commercial business, anything involving customer service now, if there is a financial penalty.
Absolutely. And if you think about how we used to talk in latency in terms of networking, right? It's like if you're the farther away you are from something, the slower it is. And now with global distribution and regional data centers and the cloud providers pretty much having a data center very close to most everyone across the globe, the latency that we're talking about really now is how fast you can retrieve data from that closest data center. When you're putting Redis into the mix, that's enabling that by pulling any data that that application needs very, very quickly from memory. Those backend systems, they're still useful. You know, we need them. Those persistence capabilities like a relational database system has, like an Oracle or a SQL Server or Postgres, you know, we still need that capability. But by placing a cache in front of those technologies, we can enable very fast access to the data and still maintain those consistency rates.
Let's tell me a little bit more about Redis, what it is, how it does it.
So Redis is, well, first of all, it stands for Remote Dictionary Service and Server, and it's a very fast, because it's in memory, right? If you think about the components of a system, where you've got your memory, you've got your disk, you've got probably some sort of some sort of interface that you're working with. All of that's managed by a bus, right? It's literally like lines of traffic into and out of these things. And in order to retrieve that data, we use that memory subsystem in order to do that. When we store data in memory, we also do our replication in memory, which means that if something happens to a primary copy, that replicated copy is immediately available for recovery. So your application still maintains that speed. But at a basic level, what we're talking about here is a better way, a faster way to store data. If you think about the data types that are in relational databases as an example, right? We talk about things like normal form. We talk about things like relationships between data, foreign key constraints, indexing, all of those types of things, which are very constraining to the design of the system. And again, I'm not saying that there aren't useful and necessary things for that, because structured data is still very important. But by pulling that data out and putting it into Redis, i.e. your cache, your application can then use the data how it needs to use it. And that's a very easy jump into microservices, which a lot of your listeners and viewers are very interested in hearing about and are probably on a journey to today, right? They're moving these big monolithic applications into microservices, into the cloud. And what are the enabling technologies that help us to do that? Redis is one of them.
Right, and it is a NoSQL database, but it's not like just sort of an ordinary NoSQL database.
The difference is that we're really a data model store, right? And as we look at the differences between what Redis has and what it doesn't have, in terms of other NoSQL databases, we cover all of these use cases, right? Like most people are familiar with things like strings, which is, you know, let's store a series of numbers and letters somewhere so we can retrieve them later. But we have all these other data types that are available that can help us enable these different use cases. And if you take a look at what I'm showing here now, you'll see all of these things are possible with Redis as your backend in-memory database. What I want to show next, though, is the data types that are available in Redis. And these data types are going to enable all of those different use cases. So, and all of these are available out of the box. We don't have to pick when we install Redis which one we're going to use. And in some cases, that can be constraining. These are all available out of the box.
I see, yes. Okay, so this is, as you say, Lego blocks for your app. And so, go ahead.
As you work your way down this list, right, the simple things at the top, like strings and bit fields and hashes, the one that I like to talk about here that folks may or may not be familiar with is hashes, right? Because a lot of these folks are coming from the relational database world. And again, as I kind of preface the conversation with, even my background was in relational. So the first thing I asked myself was, how do I get relational databases, a SQL-based database system, into a NoSQL database? I mean, it sounds impossible right out of the gate, right? Because you're saying SQL versus NoSQL. So how do you actually do that? Well, if you think of Redis as a NoSQL database, a key value store is a better way of saying that. So There's a key, which is a way to get to the data. And then there's a value, which is the thing that you want to store. And each one of these blocks is based on that concept, right? They're all key value data types. So if you want to store a string, like if you want to store your name, you could call it name and then have a value of Tim. That's a very simple example. If you wanted to store your date of birth, you call the key DOB and then you store the value of your date of birth. But in the hash section, the hash data type, that's where things get really interesting, because if you think of the structure of a table, a relational database table, it's like 1 million rows or 5 million rows or whatever it may be in that table. How do you represent that in a NoSQL database? Well, you could take a bunch of strings and you could take each individual column and its column type and its name and put them in strings, or in the hash value, the hash type can store multiple key value pairs. So basically you can make it look like a row of data from a relational database. So in the case of like lots of data from a relational database and lots of tables and that whole third normal form, as they call it, you bring all this data together, you store it in a very efficient data type inside Redis. And then the fact that it's in memory enables sub-millisecond access time to each one of those data types. Very, very quick access, very, very functional data types that you can use for purpose-built microservices. All right.
That is fantastic. When I asked you how it worked, I didn't really expect you to tell me, but you did.
I hope I did a good job on that. So
most people just wave their hands about and said, "Don't worry about that."
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
I'm a very visual guy, right? So I'm glad we have video today for that.
Yeah.
So all of those data types that are available today, all those things that we just showed, right? What you've figured out a way how to store your data. Now the data's in there. What are you going to do with it? How is your application going to access that data? It's one of the first questions they ask. Like, I want to put a cache into my system because I want to make things faster. So what types of patterns are available to us, right? These are 3 of the most common caching patterns. And so the nice big red box there on the side, that's Redis Enterprise. The box on the other side, the silo, is your backend database. And then the green box is your application. And so each one of these is going to describe a different pattern, a different way of accessing data. The very first one, cache aside, probably the most simple, is that your application is going to look in the cache first. It's going to say, hey, Redis, I need this data. Do you have it? Great. If you have it, I'm going to return it back lickety-split, sub-millisecond access time. Everybody's happy. But what happens if the data is not in the cache, right? Because typically the cache is not designed to hold all of your data. It's designed to hold some of your data. And more importantly, the most frequently accessed data. Now you can scale it, you can size it, and we'll talk about those things in a little bit. But if the data is not there, you have to go retrieve it still, right? So the customer is going to take a little bit of a hit when the call has to go to the backend database and get the data. But then after that, the data is going to be populated into Redis. And then the next person that needs it will get it lickety-split, sub-millisecond access time. So then as we traverse through these different patterns, they're basically based on service level agreements with your business to define how the cache is going to store the data, and if it will store it locally, only locally, or if it will also store it in the back end. So if you need consistency, you also make sure you store it in the back end. If you don't need consistency, you just store it in the cache. Very simple, very easy to kind of get your head around. And if you're deciding how you want to implement these, you can try all 3. You don't have to pick one necessarily, right? You can try different ones and see which works best for your application.
Is there a playbook for what's going to work best in which circumstances?
So we have a lot of different information for various verticals, right? And so if you think about like financial industry, they're governed, they have lots and lots, we've just recently had lots of crazy information, crazy news this week from financial services industry and how that's going on. Well, even when problems occur in banks, right, they still need to have, that data still needs to exist. It still needs to be persistent. It still needs to be carefully managed and carefully handled, right? That's a persistent use case where you want to make sure any transactions that occur, they always get stored in some backend system, right? In the case of, say, some sort of a gaming system, perhaps, where you're reading about news and reviews or something along those lines, maybe those comments that are stored about the reviews aren't really, critical to the business of the company, right? So those types of things may have a different SLA. So you decide based on the type of data that you're storing, the type of caching pattern that you want to use. If you always need to get the piece of truth, right, where from the source of truth, then you've got to use something that is going to store in a more persistent manner.
Mm-hmm.
So these caching solutions here, again, we've got a couple of extra on this slide, but this covers kind of a brief statement on what each caching pattern will do for you. Everything from cache aside, which just speeds up reads. You're not really too concerned about consistency, all the way down to I need to have replication, I need to be write optimized, I need to make sure everything is written to a backend database somewhere. All right.
What proportion of use cases that you come across are really optimizing the configuration of that cache?
Most of my customers will come to me initially with, I have a latency problem, right? This is going back to how we started the conversation. It's like I've scaled, I've added a bunch of compute resources to my backend database. I've added faster disks. I've upgraded my version of my database system. I've asked my developers and my system administrators to index it to high heaven, do everything they can possibly do. But yet my users are still seeing 5, 6, 7, 10 seconds of time when they're waiting between, various workflows in an application. So what we do is we'll help them. We'll look at that application and we'll say, what's the easiest way we can help initially, right? So it might be something as simple as like a SQL cache. So you use for SQL queries that are read from consistently, maybe we cache the result set of that data in Redis. And then when the application goes to look at it, it looks in Redis first. And then it says, if it's not there, go and get it from the backend database. But you solved 90% of the prefetch problems, right? At that point.
Mm-hmm.
In another case, the customer may say, I want to take all of my data out of this backend system because it's just way slow. It's some legacy database that I don't even care about anymore, or it's an older version of something, or maybe it's too expensive. And they move everything into Redis, right? And then they build the persistence and the durability on top of Redis to make sure that the data is safe inside Redis. So
it sounds from what you're saying that they can do a lot of things that produce marginal gains, but really getting this right produces huge gains.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, people have spent years. I worked in the financial services industry for years, and probably 50% of my job as a database administrator was performance tuning. So every day I would come in and some person on the other side of the phone was opening a ticket and saying, I'm trying to access this table or this materialized view or this, piece of data somewhere, and it's taking me 5 seconds to access it. So I would go in and analyze it and decide, do I need to create an index? Do I need to reorg the data itself? Do I need to migrate it from a tier 1 disk to a tier 0 disk? There's a million different things that you can do. But at the end of the day, if I would have had or been aware of caching at that point, I probably would have gone down that path, right? I mean, this is 10 years ago. Redis was around, just not as many people knew about it at that time.
Yeah.
So you'll see a lot of retrofitting of Redis on existing systems, right? And the great part about that is that there are a ton of tools that can enable those types of lift and fix, right? It's like, I want this application to run faster. What do I do? Well, you implement cache query, SQL cache query. You implement for Redis. You implement change data capture for Redis. You implement Spring cache for Redis. There's all kinds of different ways we can stack technologies on top. It's kind of an easy button for enabling Redis.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you've set out the use cases here for us actually in a lot of detail, and a lot of real world detail as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So each one of these slides will go into detail about the different caching patterns that we have, as far as when to use them, the problems they solve. But this cache aside, right, lazy loading as they refer to it, right? We want to speed up reads. We want to make sure that anytime we do a read, we want to look in the cache first and see if it's there. But it's okay if it doesn't find it, right? Because it'll just be a little bit slower for that user. So if you want to use Redis Enterprise alongside of some system of record that already exists in that use case I just described, right? An older technology or older database that you just need to speed up. Maybe your use case, all of a sudden you have an influx of users. That seems to be the classic problem, right? It's like as companies come online or they, create the next great app or they somehow enable self-servicing for their users, they have to think about the scale problem, right? If you have 1 million users, when you release your app, what happens if all 1 million users want to use it at the same time? How do things react, right? And there's been a lot of pain associated with those types of problem spaces, right? Where as soon as you release the application, it's like it falls on its face and does very poorly. So customers have to think about that these days. In this write-through caching example, for applications that write and then read data frequently. So in this case, we're saying we want to use the cache and we want to make sure we use the cache as often as possible, but we're also very concerned about the data being persisted. And we have persistence capabilities in Redis Enterprise, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But if you still want it to be written to that backend database and for other applications or reporting or long-term storage, then this is the caching pattern that you want to use. In this write behind example, everything is going to be read and written to Redis. So you're going to have, in this case, probably a relatively large cache that's going to hold all of the data, but you're also going to persist it to a backend database. Maybe at the same time, maybe slightly after, right? But you're counting on your cache to be durable in that example. And as we said earlier, Redis Enterprise is that durable option for Redis.
Got it. Now, we also, I want to be precise in this and about what is Redis Enterprise as opposed to Redis.
Absolutely. So Redis Enterprise is built on Redis open source, Redis OSS, as we refer to it. So right now, anyone who's listening could go to Redis and download from the repository the Redis open source software, install it, and use it. But it's very often updated. Lots of people are making changes to it. Lots of people that work for Redis are making changes to it. We're the primary gatekeepers of the repository, and I think the majority of the stakeholders in it. We have some external users that take a look at things, but all of those have to be approved by someone at Redis because we do take responsibility for what's out there. But Redis Enterprise is that hardened version, right? We'll take a version of Redis open source and we'll pile on enabling technologies onto that. As an example, we always deploy as a cluster. We have a fully capable UI. We have an API on the back end. All of these things that are added that maybe you can kind of piecemeal some of those things together in the open source world. But in our case, we're providing that entire package. And then, of course, you have support from the best possible Redis resources in the world. The Redis company has 24/7 follow the sun support.
Well, that matches your kind of narrative here as saying, you start off with something, you get successful, hooray, apart from you suddenly realize that this stuff isn't working as well as you want it to be, at which point this is the sort of challenge that you deploy an enterprise version to solve.
Yeah, I think that's a very common journey where we'll see users that have gone down the open source path, where they've installed Redis, they feel comfortable with managing Redis, but then something happens. And, where do most of us go as technologists, right? We go to the internet, we try to find the answer. Is the answer right? Maybe, probably, maybe not. I don't know. You go and you find what you can find. And then maybe that happens once and you get things back and running and things are okay. And then it happens again. And then the IT manager comes in and says, hey, what's going on with Redis, right? What's going on here? And then at that point, that's when we'll get the call and we'll say, hey, how would you like to have the best version of Redis possible, where you could kind of alleviate your developers, alleviate your DevOps crew from, becoming Redis experts or Redis troubleshooters. Let us help you, because most businesses aren't in the business of running Redis or running SQL databases or running Linux systems or whatever, right? They like easy. They like their infrastructure to be easy. And Redis Enterprise enables that level of easy that customers really seem to enjoy.
Yeah, which seems to fit into this Freshworks example you have here. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is one of our customers, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners are familiar with Freshworks. They used to be Freshdesk. They changed their name from Freshdesk to Freshworks. And so they have offerings, managed service offerings, and they use our Redis Enterprise managed service. And so we have the capability to basically offload all of your Redis to us, to the best Redis people possible, right? So you have a managed service now where all of your data goes into the cloud of your choice, the region of your choice, and it is managed by Redis DevOps people. So all you're really concerned about is, I know I have a Redis, I know it's a durable Redis, I know I can use it whenever I need to use it, but I don't have to worry about managing it. And this is the way they've managed their, or been able to handle their scaling. Again, going back to that same problem, what happens if all of a sudden yesterday I had 10,000 users and today I have 1 million? It's a real problem, and Redis helps solve that problem.
Yeah, it's a sort of problem that a few businesses could live with, isn't it? But yes, it is a problem. Now, yeah, we're going to talk about how we use this in practice.
Absolutely, yeah. So these next few slides are going to kind of cover the concepts of Redis Enterprise specifically, and how it's deployed and how we use it as opposed to open source. So in Redis open source, it's typically deployed on a single server as a single process, and that can be replicated to other servers, and they can be protected in that way. But in Redis Enterprise, the primary difference, or one of the primary differentiators, is that we're always a clustered deployment, which means that it'll be at least 3 nodes, which gives us some great flexibility in terms of how we recover from problems. Things like Node Watchdog and Cluster Watchdog enable recoverability outside of any manual intervention whatsoever. So if a shard process goes down and a shard process is part of a database, it will simply fail over to its replica within the cluster almost instantaneously, right? Most of those types of failures, we calculate them in single-digit seconds, sometimes even less, depending on how things are configured. If the customer needs faster recovery, we can do things around multiple proxy endpoints across nodes in the cluster. There's all kinds of things that we can do to help mitigate any potential failure. And one of the coolest things that we have available, I'll show on a subsequent slide, is our geo-replicated or active-active solution, where data can be replicated across regions, across global distributions, up to, many, many times, 2 copies, 3 copies, 10 copies, and all of those are readable and writable. Right. So move on to the next slide here. Talked about deployment options. How can I deploy Redis? Well, I'll tell everyone who's listening right now, the easiest way to get started with Redis Enterprise is Redis Stack. You can go and you can download Redis Stack. It has most of the Redis features that you might need to deploy in a development environment, and that's an easy stepping stone into Redis Enterprise. But if you want to get started with Redis Enterprise today, it's as simple as going to redis.com and choosing the cloud that you want to choose, and you can start at a free tier or on a shared infrastructure, or you can go right into a paid tier, or you can even go through the marketplaces, right? So we have offerings in GCP, we have offerings in AWS, and we have offerings in Azure that are all managed services. But if you still like that software deployment, if you still want to manage it yourself, you can go and you can download our software, install it on VMs, install it on bare metal. We even have options for Kubernetes and Pivotal Cloud Foundry, where you can run Redis Enterprise as a stateful set, which is a game changer, right? I have so many customers coming at me right now that are saying, we have Kubernetes, we're going to run on AKS, or we're going to run on EKS, or we're going to run anywhere, any kind of Kubernetes cluster that you have. Now you have the option to run Redis as close to your workload as possible. So let me talk for a second about stateless versus stateful.
Yes.
Most applications in Kubernetes are deployed as stateless, because if a pod goes down or a node goes down, no one cares. It just restarts, right? It just comes down, restart it, no big deal. When you start dealing with databases in Kubernetes, you're very concerned about persistence, specifically persistence of log files, persistence of files that will help recoverability in case of shard failures, things like that in the case of Redis. So we're deploying as a stateful set, meaning that there's always disk resources that go along with the pods that house Redis. So it's a bit of a different mindset, stateless versus stateful, but I have lots of customers that are coming now. They're deploying Redis Enterprise as a service in Kubernetes and enabling their developers to just reach into that Redis Enterprise cluster, deploy the Redis resources they need very easily and very simply. Oh, and I should add on this one, hybrid deployments are
exactly what I was going to ask.
Yes. So the hybrid deployments, if you think about a company that perhaps has an on-prem data center today or multiple on-prem data centers, their own data centers, or maybe they have a colo situation where they've migrated from on-prem to some managed building that has their servers in it. If they're on a journey to the cloud, Redis Enterprise can enable hybrid deployments through software where you can have a cluster on-prem in that colo and a cluster in the cloud of your choice, synchronize the data using that same active technology or replica of, and basically have a migration path where they want to turn off the on-prem or turn off the colo. They can just turn that dial over and all their data is available in the cloud in that second Redis Enterprise deployment.
Right, because you don't want your caching strategy to be dictating your cloud strategy, do you?
Exactly. It's one part of the stack, right? There's all these other things that have to get dragged along with it. So we want to make it as easy as possible for that part of it to just go with you.
Yeah.
So talk about high availability and globally distributed scale, right? And if the listeners don't know, like nines of availability, most people do 3 nines, 4 nines, 5 nines. 5 nines is the highest level of availability that I've seen. I don't think anyone's going to guarantee you 100% uptime because it's just not possible. But with that geo-replicated active deployment, we give you 5 nines of availability because not only do you have the redundancy in a single cluster, you now have introduced a second cluster that has the same level of redundancy that the first cluster had, and both of them have the same data set, and both of them are readable and writable. It's game-changing technology, Tim. I can't say that enough. And we have lots of customers that come to the table with Redis Enterprise just for that feature alone.
Okay. Get it.
So other protection features that we offer, we do in-memory replication. We have data persistence options. Again, everything's in memory. So if you need to flush to disk, you can do that. You can set those levels at a database level, set those levels of persistence at the database level. So one of the things that's not mentioned on this slide is the concept of multi-tenancy. Multi-tenancy is using that Redis Enterprise cluster and running multiple databases on it, where typically in the open source world, a node or a Redis deployment is a single database. Now you can carve up those resources. So this is a cost savings measure. It's an ease of manageability measure, and it makes microservices deployments that need to have their own isolated Redis much easier to manage. And of course, that last bullet, right? Technical support.
I was about to say, you mentioned that already. Yeah, absolutely. But it's important, very, very important. Yeah.
Picking up that phone and knowing that someone's on the other line to help. Myself as a role as a solutions architect, I deal with a set of customers that I'm, available for them. We have technical account managers that can be assigned based on level of agreement with support, where you get, hours of their service. We offer quarterly business reviews where folks can talk to us about their deployments and we'll understand what is going on and we can make recommendations. It's really the synergy of the relationship is really what we pride ourselves on. And we're all about the customers. So we'd love to hear from folks on that. This is a graphic.
If you're wondering why Bill hasn't called you back, it's because he's talking to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is a graphical representation of active, geo-distributed. So in this case, the application is deployed in multiple geos, and we also have Redis available in those same geos. And if any one of those geos goes down, the application could just simply reach out to another Redis. It'll be a little slower in terms of latency, but all the data will be there for it. And you don't have to do any coding for that. This is a bit of an eye chart here. Yeah, this is a big one.
We're not going to go through all of these.
No, we're not going to go through all of this. I promise.
Let's have a look and see if there's any to pull out as we got down there. Performance, we've got rolling upgrades in performance. Yeah.
Yeah, rolling upgrades are interesting in that the nodes themselves, because they're on shared nothing architecture, they allow to be put in what's called maintenance mode, where you can take a node out of the cluster, upgrade its OS or upgrade its Redis software, bring it back into the cluster, and methodically work your way through an update. And this means that your application experiences no downtime, and your customers don't have to deal with those 10, 15-second access times. Right? Redis is always there.
Excellent. What else we got? Prometheus Grafana integration. That's
yes.
So that's performance monitoring. Yeah.
Absolutely. So most customers have some sort of a centralized monitoring system that they want to make sure that they know what's going on, right? Is my cache available? Is my cache reaching capacity? Is latency, is it spiking for some reason, some subsystem? And integrations with things like Prometheus and Grafana, where we expose an endpoint and we push all that data out so you can graphically see what is happening with your Redis cache. Now, we have all those tools built in too into that UI I mentioned earlier. But if you want to integrate with something that you're already using, you can do that with this method.
Let's pick one from extensibility. REST API.
Yes. So pretty much anything you can do with the UI, you can do with the REST API. So if you want to programmatically set up everything, make it repeatable, have your developers pull code out of a repository to deploy a database, or do something else like set up access control or roles or anything like that, you can do all of that through the API.
Right. If you want to know about all the rest of them, then you have to call Redis. Luckily, they got people on the phone for you who know all about it.
Absolutely. All right. So this slide here kind of shows us the journey from open source into Redis Enterprise. You have a lot of those capabilities in open source Redis. It's a great way to get started. I talked about Redis Stack and downloading Redis Stack, introducing you to what the capabilities are there. But as you work your way up the stack and you need additional features and capabilities, you can bring Redis Enterprise into the foray. And we have easy migration paths to where if you're already using Redis Stack or you're already using Redis open source, you plug Redis Enterprise in, you take the data from your old Redis into Redis Enterprise, and you simply switch the endpoint. It's that simple. There's not a lot of complication to it. You're going to receive almost instantaneous benefits from that just by virtue of our proxy, which is going to enable that multi-tenancy and speeding things up. You're going to have that support available to you. You're going to have all those persistence options, high availability, clustering, replication. All of those are just checkboxes or simple API calls to set those things up. We have a fully blown professional services organization that can help you get started if you have complicated patterns or complicated problems that you want us to help you solve. But the great thing to know is you can get started today for free, either on the cloud, or you can download the software and get a 30-day 4-shard license to get going.
We're getting near the end, Bill. We have to start to sum up what we've been talking about. You've got through a ton of stuff. I looked at this and I thought, I'm not sure you can get through all of this, but
It is a lot of information to ingest, and we hope that this will be a primer for folks to reach out to us or go visit redis.com. We have some other resources that are available as well. Developer.redis.com is a fantastic resource where it has different paths that people can walk down and kind of talk. If you want to be operating Redis, or if you want to be developing on Redis, or you want to be creating new applications, we have resources where you can go see what other folks are working on. We have a YouTube page. We have Redis University. All of these things created by the creators of Redis. So why not get your Redis from the best place possible? That's how I always say.
Okay. So yes, you've got a couple of slides here that just sum up what we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, those enterprise grade capabilities, right? It's if you need that, if you've discovered that your Redis is an integral component to your stack today, or you want to do more with your Redis, or your Redis isn't performing to the place where you want it to be, I would encourage you to reach out and try Redis Enterprise. We've seen on multiple occasions just a simple change from Redis open source to Redis Enterprise can in and of itself enable faster cache access. So you get all of these capabilities and you're going to get more speed out of it. So what's there to lose, right? It's the best option possible. So these are a couple of those additional capabilities. I want to point out that simplifying the caching, right? So don't think of cache as a complex thing, right? It's not hard to cache, to start caching. A lot of people want to boil the ocean out of the gate, right? They're like, I want everything to be cached. The simplest way to kind of break it down is to pick one application that you know is not performing at the level that you want it to perform. And let's get together, let's talk about that application and the right pattern for it to use and determine how we can best move forward. And usually within a reasonable amount of time, we can implement something through a proof of concept that you'll see the advantages very soon.
Right. Quick, everyone, quick, get your phones, get your phones.
And I did try both of these, Tim, just to let you know. I wanted to make sure that when I see QR codes, I'm always, yeah, exactly.
They work.
Yeah, there we go. But this first one, if you want to take a cache assessment, this is a fantastic tool that'll walk you through in a wizard-like approach. Then it'll ask you about your use case. It'll ask you about the size of your data. It'll ask you about IOPS, things like that, things that we use internally for sizing workloads. And it'll help you make a decision as to what cache and how big of a cache you might need for your use case. And then the one on the right, caching at scale with Redis. I've covered some of these topics. If you want to dive deeper and you want to know more, this is a great place to start. One of the other links that I didn't mention was Redis University. I know some folks who have spent hours on Redis University, and myself included, to get the certifications. And if you come out on the other side with 2 or 3 of those certs, I'll tell you what, it's going to help your resume a lot if you don't already have Redis experience, because just about every time you do anything these days on the internet, Redis is in the back end somewhere. So there's my little tip for advancing your careers.
Absolutely. Are you hiring at the moment, Bill?
Myself, I'm not a hiring manager. I'm sure you could go out and find some open requisitions that are out there for Redis.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, good luck with that, everybody. We've given you lots of things to get you started straight after this, and I imagine quite a lot of people, but I imagine loads of people will be thinking, I'm going to have a look at that caching assessment. I don't know exactly how well I'm doing. So, it's good to know, even if the news is bad, because now we've given you things you can do about it. So, Bill, thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Tim. It's been a fantastic working with you on this, and I hope we get to work together soon again. And I look forward to your listeners reaching out and us being able to help them with their caching needs. Redis Enterprise is a fantastic opportunity for everyone.
I think that's great. I'm only sorry we didn't see the dog, but next time, eh?
I closed the door. It's amazing he didn't try to come in.
Yeah, yeah. There's always a chance. And but Bill, thank you so much for that. Thanks everyone for watching this. How it's really practical, and there was a lot of it. Remember, you can download this deck so you can read all the extra bits that we didn't have time to go through. If you want to hear more about this, let us know. We'll put some more on for you. But for now, I've just got to say thank you to Bill. Thank you to everyone behind the scenes at the Register that helped put this on. And from me, Tim Phillips, I'll see you soon. Goodbye.